Hi everyone, I'm Jack Crawford, and it's time to review Kentucky Route Zero by Cardboard Computer. Cardboard Computer are a three-person studio who have been working on Kentucky Route Zero for something like 10 years now. Even when the first act released back in 2013, it was clear to me that there was something special about this game. I don't often get excited about games that are as story-focused and light on gameplay as Kentucky Route Zero, but that doesn't mean I'm opposed to them, I just think it's hard to get them right. But as years passed by, it became obvious that Cardboard Computer were committed to getting it right. The final act released a couple weeks ago, and I'm happy to confirm that Kentucky Route Zero more or less lives up to the hype. The first thing you should know about Kentucky Route Zero is that it may not be the type of experience you expect from a great game. Probably closer to what you'd expect from a great work of literature. Fortunately, if you're paying attention early on, the game subtly suggests how you should play it and also how you should think about it and appreciate it. It wastes no time establishing its overall melancholic tone. Most likely the first thing you'll inspect is the dog, and you'll get this line: "An old hound in a straw hat, both have seen better days." Then you might inspect the truck and learn that you're delivering for an antique store. In just these first two bits of text, the game is telling you something crucial about this character, Conway. Kentucky Route Zero has characters with a lot of depth. It spends the time building them up so that you understand their perspective and the important decisions they make later on. And already in the first minute, it's starting to do that with Conway. A few minutes later, you have to figure out the password for this gas station computer, and you're told that the password is like one of those short poems that really sums it all up. You're given options to write a poem, and no matter what you choose, it works. This helps establish the kind of surreal story Kentucky Route Zero is going to be, but it's also sort of teaching you how to play it as a game. Most people are used to choices in games that have a big effect on the story. This password poem shows you clearly right off the bat that your choices aren't always going to change the story. Instead, the game is encouraging you to use the choices to shape the emotional character of the scenes. The visuals were what originally grabbed my attention back in 2013. The decision to have the camera pretty far away from the characters, for the most part, allows them to play with scale more and communicate through the architecture as well. I'm sure someone more knowledgeable about architecture could do a detailed analysis on that alone. Cardboard Computer have clearly looked to so many different art forms for guidance and inspiration for this project, which is great. Building something out in 3D, then squishing it down to 2D like this always seems to lead to outstanding results. It also means a scene can be much more elaborate than in most 2D point-and-click adventure games, because the camera can move deeper into a scene or even rotate. They also consistently framed these scenes well. It's clear they understand shot composition. For instance, there's so much more depth to these shots compared to similar games. I love the use of color and lighting throughout. Every time I saw sunlight in this game, it was memorable because it was used very intentionally. I also appreciate that they went out of their way to add tons of little details that most players will never see. The animations are the weakest part of the visuals. They're not terrible by any means, but I'm not a big fan of the somewhat stiff character movements. Plus, they often took shortcuts to avoid making unique animations, and there are places where one animation would have gone a long way. I like how this game makes the distinction in the first act between a mystery and a puzzle. Kentucky Route Zero's story is more of a mystery, and it doesn't want you to work too hard putting the pieces together because there's not always a correct answer. I don't want to spoil much about the story, but the basic premise is that Conway has to make a delivery to an unfamiliar address, and he's told that he has to take a mysterious, little-known highway called the Zero. The style of storytelling is heavily inspired by magical realist authors like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, with fantasy elements like this secret highway integrated into an otherwise grounded world. By the way, the game references Marquez directly, along with a wide variety of other artists. The writing is exceptional. This is quite an experimental story structurally, so it's nice to see the writing step up to the challenge and strike the right tone for all the different contexts. But what really sets it apart from most writing in games is how dense it is. It's always trying to accomplish more than one thing at a time, like advancing the plot while also setting a mood, or developing a character while also reinforcing a theme. I really enjoyed the interludes. It seems like there was a conscious effort to use them to add as much variety as possible. They drastically change the pace in terms of style and sometimes tone, yet they still manage to contribute to the overall experience. They're not diversions. This game made me feel so many different emotions at different times without sacrificing the overall tone. It's in some ways trying to be like a classic tragedy, but there's optimism and hope here too. It's a bit of an emotional roller coaster sometimes, but in a good way. It has that style where hilarious parts and brutal, gut-wrenching parts are mixed in with everything else, so it all feels very real. Some of the best lines hit much harder because they're so unexpected. This is another area where Kentucky Route Zero excels. It has these powerful moments that stick with me. Sometimes it's one beautiful line that sits perfectly in a scene and carries so much meaning, like one of those short poems that really sums it all up. Other standout moments are centered around the music. This game has an amazing and very fitting soundtrack comprised of some mostly ambient electronic tracks and some new recordings of old hymns and bluegrass music. The music is a huge contributing factor to the atmosphere of certain scenes. Normally, I would link some of my favorite tracks in the description, but I think it adds a lot to hear everything for the first time in context. But truly, I can't praise the soundtrack enough, and it knows when it should come more to the forefront and when it should be more subtle. It's nice seeing such wide dynamic range in a game. It makes both the quieter and the louder moments more effective. I like that the music is often diegetic, but I did have an issue with a couple of songs in particular where the recording wasn't a good fit for how it was presented in-game. For instance, I'm watching someone sing and play guitar on a little boat slowly drifting down the river. The audio should sound like it could be coming from that person, but it doesn't. It's overproduced, and I can't help but picture the guy in the studio right up on the mic. This pulled me out of the experience for what would have otherwise been some of the most moving scenes in the game. It's a minor problem, but it happened to strike at the worst possible times. Unfortunately, there was a pattern across my 2 playthroughs of minor issues striking at the worst possible times. Several times per playthrough, the game would softlock because the next text box didn't get triggered for whatever reason. Whenever this happened, I had to quit out of the game, reload, and usually restart the scene. 2 of these softlocks were particularly bad, ruining the flow of important scenes. There was a pivotal point in the story where they tried to do something clever with the mouse cursor, which was a brilliant idea, but there was a bug which made it lose all impact. It just left me confused and distracted. I have mixed feelings about the design decisions for the controls and interface. I ended up appreciating the way the dialogue options work. At first, I didn't like the idea of missing so much dialogue and even whole scenes sometimes, and the game can flow a bit better or worse depending on your choices. But this game is good enough that I think a lot of people are going to want to replay it, and the fact that there are significant changes and new things to do on future playthroughs enhances the dreamlike quality of the game. One design decision that baffles me is how they changed the text boxes when they released the final act. They used to be much smaller, now they cover up too much of the scene. I guess they wanted to keep previous paragraphs on screen longer, but you can scroll up to older text, so it's unnecessary. Also, closing a text box now requires a precise click, which is a minor change, but a pointless and irritating one. There were 2 major chunks of the game where the control scheme changed and introduced new problems, the worst of the 2 being the interlude where you control a silent character on stage in a play. I actually like this in concept. It's one example of how they played with perspective in interesting ways by letting you control a lot of different characters. It's funny reading all this disrespect toward you from both directions, the others on stage and the audience. But for some reason, the text boxes in this interlude are ridiculously small, so you have to click through tons of tiny chunks of text, often a fraction of a sentence at a time, or else let it auto-advance very slowly. One more example of a seemingly minor issue having a big impact was a major decision, maybe the most significant one in the game because of the way it affects the ending. The movement in the scene suggested I didn't have much time to choose, but it was presented in an unusual and misleading way, which led to me accidentally choosing the opposite of what I wanted. The good news is, a lot of my complaints seem like they could be fixed. There are other minor problems that are not so easy to fix. For instance, there's a decent amount of stuttering in the final act, and often the camera perspective in a scene makes it hard to click the right spot to move. But fortunately, that stuff isn't nearly as disruptive. So, this is a game with incredible aesthetics. I love the direction they took this project, and it really left an impression on me. But the game design and technical side didn't quite manage to do the ideas justice. It's still a great game though, even in its current state. It explores its ideas so thoroughly. It's heartbreaking, it's beautiful. I guarantee people will be playing and talking about this thing for a long time. But since this is such a special game, I think it's worth waiting a few months for any bug fixes to come in before playing. Maybe soon I'll be able to recommend it even more highly. As of now, I'm giving Kentucky Route Zero an 8 out of 10. Let me know in the comments what you think of this one. I'd actually like to know if other people experienced as many technical problems as I did. Feel free to suggest any other new games for me to review. Also, check out my other videos if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.